What if the absolute best person for your open role looks completely unqualified on paper?
Oh, it happens all the time.
Right, because you have an open position, you post a description, and, well, the applications just flood in. But traditional resumes are, they're fundamentally designed to highlight compliant worker bees.
Yeah, they just list standard duties, chronological timelines, and, those really safe metrics.
Exactly. So today, we're looking at how to bypass that rigid system. We are diving into a guide from StellaPop, and it's titled Top 3 Golden Qualities to Look For When Hiring a New Candidate.
It's such a great piece.
It really is. The mission of this deep dive is to decode the underlying traits that identify true innovators. We want to find the rare candidates who won't just execute tasks, but will actually revolutionize your team.
Or, if you are the one sitting in the interviewee chair, we're going to look at the psychology of what you need to project to become that absolute must-hire candidate.
Yes, got to have them.
Exactly, because the real value in this StellaPop material is the focus on the actual mechanics of hiring. Identifying a top-tier candidate goes way beyond scanning a document for keywords like motivated or self-starter.
Ugh, those buzzwords. We see them everywhere.
Right, they mean nothing anymore. We are looking at the specific behavioral indicators that expose a person's true working style, like how to design interview questions that actually force those indicators to the surface.
And crucially, how to avoid suffocating that talent once they are actually on your payroll.
Yes. Because placing a highly disruptive innovator into a rigid corporate structure, well, it usually ends in disaster if you don't manage the integration correctly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we evaluate how a candidate behaves in the day-to-day trenches of a job, we first have to examine the lens through which they view their fundamental relationship to work.
Which is so foundational.
It is. And the source material identifies this baseline as trait 1, which is an entrepreneurial mindset. Now, they make a sharp distinction here. We are not talking about someone who, simply likes to work hard or had a side hustle selling crafts online.
No, not at all. The underlying psychology of the entrepreneurial mindset in a corporate employee is it's about structural disruption. You are probing to see if they just accept the parameters given to them.
Right.
Or if they immediately look for ways to optimize, bypass, or completely rewrite those parameters. The source uses this great archetype of the pirate versus the sailor.
I love that analogy.
It works so well.
Yeah.
A sailor follows orders, swabs the deck, and, hopes the captain navigates safely. They play it safe. But a pirate takes ownership of the voyage. They want to conquer new territory.
Yeah, and in a corporate environment, these pirate candidates view whatever project they are handed as their own standalone enterprise. I think about it like hiring someone who operates as a franchisee of their own specific department.
That's a perfect way to put it, a franchisee.
Yeah, because even if they exist inside this massive bureaucratic corporate structure, they treat the success, the efficiency, and the profit margins of their specific area as if it were their own personal bank account.
They have a vested proprietary interest in the outcome.
Exactly. Rather than just clocking in to satisfy a manager's expectations.
What's fascinating here is how that franchise mentality translates into a bottom line impact. Someone with an entrepreneurial mindset doesn't just execute a strategy. They evaluate the strategy's validity.
Right. They question the map itself.
Exactly. If you ask a standard candidate about a past success, you usually get a very linear story. They might say, I managed 50 accounts, I hit all my KPIs, and I retained 95% of my clients.
Which sounds good on the surface.
Sure, it's a good answer, but it's a sailor's answer. They swab the deck perfectly.
Wait, so how does the pirate answer that same question in an interview?
The pirate reveals a moment where they question the rules of the game itself. Their answer sounds more like, I was managing my 50 accounts, and I noticed my KPIs were actually measuring the wrong metric.
Wow.
Yeah, they'll say the metrics were incentivizing bad customer service. So I built a data-backed case, took it to leadership, and overhauled the entire department's metric system.
That's a massive difference. They didn't just win the game, they changed the rules of the game to ensure a bigger victory for the whole company.
Exactly. And spotting this requires asking candidates for stories where they were handed a broken system and had to navigate completely unfamiliar waters to fix it.
So you are listening for a very specific combination of influence and action. Because, it isn't just about having a radical idea.
Yeah.
Anyone can sit in a meeting and complain that the KPIs are wrong.
Oh, plenty of people do that.
Right. But the entrepreneurial mindset requires the candidate to actually build the case, persuade others to walk the new path, and then execute the change. It is action-oriented disruption.
And that operational disruption brings up a critical requirement. A pirate mindset tells the candidate that the industry or the department needs to change. But how do they actually figure out the specific mechanics of how to change it?
They have to dig into it.
Exactly. They need an investigative engine to uncover the flaws in the current system.
Which takes us perfectly to the second golden quality from the Stellapop Guide, which is keen curiosity. The source introduces this with a really great rephrasing of an old cliche. They say, curiosity doesn't kill the cat. It makes the cat king of the molehill.
I love that phrasing.
It's so good. A candidate with keen curiosity is relentless about the hows and whys of the business. They have zero problem blowing past arbitrary boundaries to figure out how a product or an internal process actually functions at its core.
In a practical setting, curiosity is the mechanism that prevents stagnation. A curious hire is just never content with the phrase, well, that is just how we've always done it.
Oh, the most dangerous phrase in business.
Absolutely. They view routine processes as puzzles waiting to be optimized. So when you are interviewing, you don't just ask if they consider themselves a curious person. I mean, everyone will say yes to that.
Of course.
Yeah.
No one says, no, I hate learning things.
Right. Instead, you ask them to describe a scenario where they encountered a problem completely outside their normal scope of work, and you listen for how deep they dug to find the root cause.
I have to push back on this concept, though. Wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If you are a hiring manager and you bring in this fiercely curious candidate who is constantly dipping beyond their routine scope to ask deep questions and buck the status quo, doesn't that employer risk them becoming a massive distraction?
That's the fear, yeah.
Right. Couldn't they end up dropping the ball on their actual day-to-day job duties because they are off investigating some random inefficiency in the IT department when they're supposed to be doing marketing?
This raises an important question, and it is precisely why many traditional managers subconsciously avoid hiring these types of candidates. They fear losing control.
Which makes sense if the person is just wandering around all day.
Exactly. But we have to distinguish between random, chaotic distraction and directed curiosity. The guide emphasizes that true curiosity in a high-level candidate is tied to proactive learning that yields tangible breakthroughs.
So it has to have an ROI.
Precisely. Let's look at another interview scenario. A distracted employee says, I noticed a weird spike in our data, so I spent 3 days falling down a Wikipedia rabbit hole about demographic shifts, and I didn't finish my weekly report.
Right. That is just pure distraction.
Yes, but a candidate with directed, keen curiosity says, I noticed a weird spike in our regional data. My normal job is just to compile the report, but I wanted to know why the spike happened.
Going beyond the surface.
Yes. They'll say, I spent the weekend teaching myself a basic scraping tool to pull more data, and I discovered a completely new customer demographic we were entirely ignoring. The curiosity is a weapon used to hunt down value.
That distinction makes perfect sense. The curiosity is tethered to the company's success. It isn't just, wandering around the office asking why the walls are painted beige.
Exactly.
It is looking at a massive complex workflow and asking why it takes 5 steps when it could theoretically take 2.
And identifying that a workflow could be reduced from 5 steps to 2 is a brilliant insight. But having an insight is only half the battle. If they just stare at the workflow, realize it is inefficient, and go back to their desk, well, the company gains absolutely nothing.
Right. It's just an idea at that point.
Yeah, curiosity is just daydreaming if it isn't paired with an execution engine.
That is the perfect transition to the third golden trait, which is proactive behavior. Now, everyone claims to be proactive on their resume. Everyone.
That's not 99% of resumes.
But the source defines this with intense specificity. Being proactive doesn't mean taking a little initiative to start your work early. It means foreseeing potential fires well before the match is even struck and standing there with the hose ready.
That's the real differentiator.
Yeah, the guide notes that these candidates rarely wait for a green light when facing challenges. They essentially become the green light.
The psychological shift here is moving from a reactive state to an anticipatory state, because most of the workforce operates reactively. A problem occurs, management alerts the team, and the team works hard to solve it.
Which is fine. That's normal.
It is normal. But a genuinely proactive candidate surveys the horizon, identifies a threat that management hasn't even noticed yet, and neutralizes it before it ever impacts the daily operations.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because it is the fundamental difference between a smoke detector and a smart sprinkler system.
I like that.
Yeah, think about it. A typical, highly competent employee is a smoke detector. They are highly reliable. They sense a problem, they beep loudly to alert management, and they say, hey, there's a massive fire in the supply chain.
And they did their job perfectly.
They did, but the supply chain is still burning. A candidate with proactive behavior operates like a smart sprinkler system. They sense the temperature rising in the supply chain, they notice the conditions are getting dangerous, and they actively cool the room down before the flames ever break out.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about how you actually uncover that smart sprinkler mentality in an interview. Because most hiring managers ask something like, tell me about a time you put out a fire.
Right. And then the candidate tells a heroic story about staying at the office until 3 a.m. to fix a crashed server.
Which is entirely a reactive story.
Exactly. They're celebrating being a smoke detector.
Yes. To find the pirate, you have to change the question. You ask, tell me about a time you identified a problem months before anyone else realized it was a threat, and what steps you took to preemptively dismantle it.
That forces a completely different kind of answer.
It does. A proactive candidate will tell you a story about noticing server loads trending upward by 5% every month and deciding to completely rebuild the architecture 3 months before the busy season so the crash never happened in the first place.
They problem solve preemptively.
Exactly. They take on projects with minimal supervision because they don't require a manager to point out the problems for them.
So let's look at the reality of this. You do the hard work. You change your interview questions. You successfully hunt down this incredible candidate who possesses the entrepreneurial mindset, the keen curiosity to find hidden value, and the proactive execution to make it happen. You hire the pirate.
Congratulations. Now the hard part starts.
Right. The source material offers a massive warning here. Identifying them is the easy part. The real danger is bringing this highly disruptive force into a traditional corporate environment and accidentally crushing their spirit within the first 6 months.
Bringing an innovator into a rigid system usually causes intense friction. I mean, a corporate environment relies on compliance, standardization, and predictability.
It has to function at scale.
Exactly. But an entrepreneurial pirate thrives on questioning standards and breaking predictable routines. So if you don't actively manage that friction, the pirate becomes frustrated, toxic, and eventually leaves.
This is where the guide introduces a supporting cast of secondary qualities, and I want to zero in on the most crucial one, which is high EQ or emotional intelligence.
It's vital.
Because a disruptor with low emotional intelligence is just a bully. They will walk into a room, point out that a legacy system is terribly inefficient, and completely alienate the senior staff who spent 10 years building that system.
Emotional intelligence is the required lubricant that allows the pirate to operate within the corporate machine. They just must have the self-awareness and empathy to understand how their disruption affects others.
It's about delivery.
Yeah, a pirate with high EQ knows how to pitch their radical 5-step to 2-step workflow reduction in a way that makes the legacy staff feel included and valued rather than insulted. They rely on collaboration and adaptability. They know that their brilliant ideas require the support of the wider team to actually get implemented.
And the guide also outlines 3 specific operational strategies a company must deploy to nurture this kind of talent. The first is offering continuous learning. This means putting them in seminars or assigning them cross-functional projects outside their normal purview.
The mechanism behind continuous learning is about feeding their curiosity. If an entrepreneurial mind stops learning, it becomes bored. And a bored pirate will either abandon ship or start causing trouble just for the stimulation.
You have to keep the horizon moving for them.
You do. Pairing them with mentors who also exhibit these disruptive traits gives them a safe space to channel their energy productively.
The second strategy is offering rewards and recognition. When a team member displays proactive, curious traits, you have to spotlight it. You reward the innovator publicly.
This serves a dual purpose. It validates the pirate, proving that the company actually values their disruption. But more importantly, it establishes a cultural benchmark for the rest of the workforce.
And send a message.
Yes. It signals to the sailors on the team that taking initiative and solving problems preemptively is the clearest path to advancement in your organization.
The third strategy the guide highlights is equipping and enabling your team. This means fostering an environment of true empowerment, encouraging autonomy so they can take initiative without constant oversight.
Giving them the space to work.
Right. You create channels for open communication where they can suggest unconventional ideas without fear of censure, ridicule, or risking their job security. But so, what does this all mean in practice? Because I have to ask a challenging question on behalf of anyone listening who actually manages a department.
Go ahead.
Giving highly proactive, disruptive team members complete autonomy and telling them they can suggest wild, unconventional ideas without any fear of censure, doesn't that fundamentally risk creating absolute chaos in the workplace?
It sounds like it could.
Yeah. If everyone is acting like the CEO of their own little enterprise and nobody is afraid of being reprimanded who is actually steering the main ship, how do you maintain alignment?
It is the most common fear managers have. But equipping and enabling does not mean abdicating your role as a leader. It doesn't mean handing them a blank check and hoping for the best.
Okay, so what does it look like?
You are still providing the overarching strategic goals, the budget, and the ultimate destination. Enabling them means removing the suffocating layer of micromanagement. You are giving them the autonomy to chart the specific course to get to that destination.
I see. You define the what, but you let them define the how.
Yes, exactly. And keeping communication channels open without fear of ridicule is about removing the culture of fear. When a proactive employee suggests a radical solution and a manager shoots it down harshly just because it is unconventional, well, that employee learns to stop suggesting things.
They revert to being a smoke detector.
Completely. By welcoming the ideas, even the ones you ultimately decide not to implement, you maintain a culture of resilience. You keep their entrepreneurial engine running so it is ready when you actually need it.
Let's bring all of this together. If you want to build a flourishing, forward-thinking team capable of surviving the lightning-fast evolution of today's market, you have to stop looking for candidates who just check the standard boxes.
The standard boxes won't save you.
No, they won't. You need the entrepreneurial mindset, the pirate who takes ownership of the outcome. You need keen curiosity, the relentless investigative engine searching for hidden value. And you need proactive behavior, the smart sprinkler system that neutralizes threats before they ignite.
And crucially, once you find these individuals, you must nurture them through continuous learning, public recognition, and the autonomy to actually execute their vision.
Right. It's a whole package.
It is. When you combine those three traits and support them with high emotional intelligence and a culture that welcomes disruption, you are no longer just filling open roles. You are fundamentally upgrading the DNA of your organization.
That's a great way to put it.
But looking back over everything we have discussed from the Stella Pot Guide, there is a fascinating underlying theme that reveals a massive blind spot in modern business.
Ooh, what's the blind spot?
Notice the methodology required to actually spot these traits. Every single technique we discussed relies on narrative.
Oh, you're right.
You can't test for a pirate mindset with a multiple choice questionnaire. You have to ask them to describe a scenario. You have to analyze the specific stories they choose to tell about preemptive problem solving, bucking the status quo, and turning challenges into opportunities.
The ultimate test for identifying an innovator is purely narrative.
Purely narrative,
Yeah.
which forces us to ask a really difficult question about our standard operating procedures. If finding the perfect candidate relies entirely on the nuanced narrative of their past actions, like how they navigated friction, how they exercised curiosity, how they preempted disaster, then the traditional resume is fundamentally obsolete for this task.
Wow. Yeah, it really is.
A piece of paper that simply lists dates of employment and sterile worker bee metrics cannot, by definition, capture the traits of a true disruptor.
That is something for you to seriously think about. If you are struggling to find the rare needle in a haystack candidate who will actually move your company forward, maybe the problem isn't your talent pool.
It might be your tools.
Exactly. Maybe the problem is that the traits you are desperately looking for don't even exist on paper. They only exist in the stories those candidates are waiting for you to ask them to tell.